In the attic, they're now worth $124 million. In the middle of the shareholders' meeting, hotel ballroom chandeliers buzzing and everything smelling like coffee and carpet cleaner. I stood up, took the mic right out of the investor relations guy's hand, and said 3 words. Check the ledger. That's when the room changed. Heads turned. Phones came out. And a man in a charcoal suit I hadn't seen in 15 years slid into the aisle, nodded at me, and lifted a blue accordion case. The CEO's smile stiffened, and the board chair's fingers went white around her pen. Before I rewind, do me a favor, tap subscribe and drop a quick comment telling me where you're watching from. I'm June in Duluth, Minnesota, born and raised on Lake Superior, and yes, we measure winter in layers. Let me take you back to how we got here, because none of this started beneath those chandeliers. It started in dust. 10 months earlier, the attic was a museum of our family's stubbornness. I've lived in the same skinny green house on 4th Street for 42 years. Clapboard siding that needs paint, a wire clothesline, and the kind of kitchen table that could tell your secrets. The attic had 50 years of life. Baby clothes, army trunks, a rocking horse that creaked like it had asthma, and boxes of papers marked in my late husband's handwriting. Charlie had the plainest printing you ever saw, all angles and patience. He died 12 years ago on a too bright April morning, and if you think time softens it, it doesn't. You just learn how to keep stirring the pot without showing the burn. My grandson, Mason, was on the last day of his summer break and had agreed, under protest and promises of cheese curds, to help me clear. He was 17 and in that lanky stage with a voice that could be gravel or butter depending on his mood, a baseball cap flipped backward and eyes that don't miss much. "Gran," he called, his voice echoing off the rafters as I folded a faded quilt. "What's Lakeview Microdata?" I was on my knees, trying to decide if I'd ever use a fondue set again, when I looked over. He had found a tin, a biscuit tin, pale blue with a girl feeding geese, that had been my mother's. Inside, nestled like they knew they mattered, were thick paper certificates with beautiful scrollwork, embossed seals, and a company name I hadn't read in decades, Lakeview Microdata, Inc. The certificates were the old kind, shaded borders, the ink still crisp. Series B preferred, convertible, they said. Each one had a small birch leaf embossed in silver by the corporate seal. Remember that detail, the birch leaf. It would come back around. "They're pretty," Mason said, because he is decent enough to appreciate beauty even when he doesn't understand it. He lifted one carefully by the edges, the way I taught him to carry photo negatives when he was a boy. "Says worthless," he added, squinting at the pencil scrawl on the envelope they were tucked in. I took the top certificate and rubbed my thumb over the paper, feeling the way good paper fights your skin a little. "Your granddad worked there," I said, "back when computers took up rooms and coffee pots took up half the day." I smiled at the memory I didn't know I still had, the smell of solder and coffee beans, the way Charlie used to come home with his tie loosened and his eyes alive. "We moved here because of that job." He flopped onto his back and let his arm dangle in the heat above his head. "So are they worth anything?" he asked, not hopeful, just curious. "You wrote worthless." "I wrote that," I admitted, "when we needed quick money after your granddad passed and I took them to the bank. The manager called them grandma wallpaper." I made a face at the memory. "We had bills. I didn't have time to chase ghosts. The bank told me the company was long gone, rolled up into something, and whatever conversions there were expired in, oh, I don't know, 1998. Anyway, I kept them because they were pretty." Grandma wallpaper, he repeated, indignant on my behalf because that's who he is when he isn't pretending he isn't. Well, I'm not writing your life off like a bad debt. He sat up, careful with the edges, and grinned. Can I take pictures of these for my econ teacher? He'll geek. He said it like I wouldn't understand, but I said it first. He'll geek. And his laugh was music. He took pictures on his phone. The camera made that crunchy fake shutter sound. I'm going to look it up. I should tell you something about me before we go much further. I'm 68. I spent 37 years as a school librarian with the keys to every locked cabinet, and I've been called everything from dragon lady to miracle worker, depending on whether I was telling you no or finding what you needed. I raised my daughter Dana, mostly alone, and then I helped her raise Mason when she was working double shifts at St. Luke's. We didn't have much, but we had enough. And if you think dignity shows up when the money does, you haven't seen how we make funeral coffee up here. So when my grandson says he's going to look something up, I believe he will. But I also consider what happens when you find the wrong truth. Don't get your hopes up, I told him. Too late, he said, the exact way his mother used to say it when she was 5, scampering off to find a snowbank big enough to jump from the porch into. He left a flurry of lint in his wake and took the top certificate with him to photograph in better light. I didn't think any more about it that night than I would about a moth flying around the porch light. I made mac and cheese. We watched an old movie because I insisted that kids need to see people wearing hats, and he insisted to me that men still wear hats, just not indoors. In the morning, I found a note by the coffee maker in all caps, like his texts when he thinks the volume changes the meaning. Call me when you're up. I called him. It rang twice, and he answered breathless. Gran, listen. Lakeview Microdata got acquired by North Shore Systems in '94. That got bought by Cedar Ridge Telecom in 2001, and Cedar Ridge became Cedar Ridge Telecom Holding, like the national one, in 2010. The conversion terms. This is where it gets nuts. He paused for effect, because he is my grandson. The Series B converted to Class D at a ratio that then split 5 times. I ran the math, and I might be off. But these aren't wallpaper. They're something. How much something? I asked, leaning against the counter, my heart doing that little bird flutter in my chest it does when I'm trying not to expect too much. Ballpark. He hesitated, the way you do when you're about to say a number that sounds like a joke. I think the number starts with a 9, a lot of zeros after. Mason, I warned. Like, in the 8 figures, he said. Maybe 9, depending on split history and whether the conversion rights survived the reincorporation. I laughed. If you've never had a laugh choke on tears, don't try it. Go to school, I told him. We'll look into it. I knew you'd say that, he said. His voice softened. But Gran, this is real. There's a guy on a forum who worked at Cedar Ridge who says the transfer agent never cancelled a bunch of old Lakeview shares during the merger because there was a class action. There might be a reversion clause. Stop, I said, because my stomach was doing that thing it did in those first months after Charlie died, when every bill that came made me feel like I had swallowed a stone. We'll look into it. After school. One step at a time. I hung up and put my hand flat on the counter as if the laminate could steady me. Remember this detail. My fingers. How they know when paper matters. They started to tingle. I made an appointment at the bank because that's what you do when you live in a place like mine. You try the polite door first. The Lake Avenue branch of North Lakes Bank still had a silver bell by the door. The manager, A woman named Rhonda with a haircut I recognized because it's the one you get when you need to look like you don't have time for haircuts, met with me in her glass-walled office. I laid the certificates on her desk like I was placing a newborn. She whistled under her breath, soft like you do at a sunrise. Pretty, she said, which was step one in me forgiving her for whatever came next. We don't see many of these anymore. The world went paperless. Nobody asked the paper about it. My grandson thinks, I started, but she put up a hand in that managerial way meant to say, let me get you to yes, but often leads to no. I know someone, she said, who does recoveries. There are companies, finders, who will process these for you. They take a fee, but they handle the headache. These old ones are a nightmare for regular people. It's a maze. There are time bars and, if there was a merger or a re-domestication in Delaware. She smiled apologetically, like she was explaining a decision made in a windowless room. We've had good luck with Heritage Recovery Group. They'll do a free evaluation and tell you right away what you're holding. I've heard of them. I lied. I hadn't. But pride is funny. What do they take? 30 to 40%, she said, and then rushed to add, which is standard, for contingent cases. I picked up one of the certificates and held it to the light. The birch leaf winked. I'm a librarian, I said. I don't mind a maze. She leaned forward, gentler now. Mrs. Avery, she said, reading my name from the form, even though she'd known my face since she started. This can be predatory. People your age. She stopped herself. People are taken advantage of. Let me make you an appointment. They can come to your home even. I thanked her, tucked the certificates away, and left with a copy of a brochure that smelled like ink and fear. Outside the bank, the sky was pale, the lake more steel than blue. I sat in my car, looked at my hands on the steering wheel, and thought about the time Dana told me not to let the man sell me the more expensive vacuum because it had a prettier purple. They make you feel old on purpose, she had said, sweeping her own hair into a ponytail. It's a tactic. Remember that. Mason called me after school like a kettle going off. Gran. Okay, hear me out. The transfer agent for Cedar Ridge is Heron and Davenport Trust. They have a number for old certificates. I called, and the hold music was jazz. But then a woman named Tanya picked up, and she was just this side of helpful. She said they can't confirm anything without the QSIP numbers and the certificate numbers. But she told me to look at the back for a small stamp that says cancelled or a hole punch pattern. I turned the certificate over on my kitchen table. The back was clean. No cancels. On the front, just the signature of some corporate secretary who probably had a haircut like Rhonda's 30 years earlier. No cancel, I said. He exhaled like I had scored a goal. Okay. Then we need a medallion signature guarantee from your bank if there's a transfer. Maybe we should go in person to Cedar Ridge's Investor Relations office in Minneapolis. Mason, I said, trying to slow him down and myself with him. We'll take it step by step. No running before we test the ice. He came over after dinner, eyes bright, laptop humming. He had printed out a thread from an investors forum and highlighted like I taught him to, 2 colors, no more. Look, he said, jabbing at some man's account of a class action suit filed in the 90s over conversion rights. A reversion clause means if the company didn't give proper notice and record keeping, old certificates remain valid. If they did a reverse merger, they may have tried to clean it up later, but if the notices didn't reach you, you may be entitled. It depends on Minnesota law at the time. It's confusing, but there's a whole nerd world that cares about this. I held the paper, saw the enthusiasm in the marks, and realized my grandson was not just hopeful. He was attached. That's when you have to be careful. That's when you need to test the ice with both feet and your whole weight, not just tap at the edges. Dana came in through the back door with her cheeks red from the wind and her name badge lanyard tangled in her scarf. She dropped her tote and kissed my head. "What are we scheming?" she asked, voice tired but sweet. "The hospital has a way of rearranging your tone by the end of a 12-hour. "Who are we mad at?" Mason volleyed back. "The system," in that playful way. And then he told her, spooling out the story. I watched her face, the way she pressed her lips together to keep her smile from running away with her. While she listened, she took off her shoes and lined them neatly, reversed the couch pillow with the gravy stain, and took an apple without asking because she is mine. When he finished, she put her hand over mine. "This will be whatever it is," she said, which is my daughter's way of saying, "Hope, but buckle up." The next morning, I called Heron and Davenport. The hold music was jazz. When Tanya came on, I told her my name, my certificates, my late husband, and a few details that I knew mattered, like the corporate seal's birch leaf. She went quiet. "Mrs. Avery," she said carefully, "I'm going to need to take your number and have someone call you back. We've had inquiries. If you receive any calls from third parties, please don't sign anything. There are bad actors who watch state records." "Why would they watch state records?" I asked, though I knew. The older I get, the more I realize if it can be done, someone does it. "If there's an unclaimed property case," she said, pausing as if to find the least alarming words. "They try to insert themselves as locators. Please, wait for our registrar to call you." "What's a registrar?" I asked. "I'm sorry," she said. "The person who supervises the master shareholder list. All ownership flows through them." That afternoon, the phone rang again. My landline, the one that only rings for bad news or wrong numbers. "Mrs. Avery?" a man said smoothly. "My name is Landon Pike. I'm a specialist in recovering legacy assets. You've been flagged for certificates that may be worthless, and we'd like to help you avoid unnecessary fees." "How do you know that?" I asked. "We monitor public filings," he said. "You may have been in contact with a transfer agent. We can expedite. We work with older clients frequently. No offense. Our fee is 28%, contingent. And we come to you. Would tomorrow morning be convenient?" "No offense," I repeated, aware my voice had gone cooler. "Who gave you my phone number?" "It's in the database," he said, not untruthfully, which is different from truth. "And I do want to caution you about Cedar Ridge Telecom. They are notoriously difficult with legacy claimants. They may attempt to declare your certificates invalid. We can prevent that. We have, in fact, a relationship with the General Counsel's office." "I'm not signing anything," I said, and hung up. My hand shook. That wasn't fear. That was anger. There's a flavor to it, like pennies. 2 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, it was a man who introduced himself as Graham from Cedar Ridge. And my stomach did a small somersault, because you don't go from jazz to a real person at a major company unless something is moving. "Mrs. Avery? Yes," he said, voice trained to sound like a smile you might trust. "Graham Lyle, Investor Relations. Thank you for your patience. We've located Lakeview microdata in our corporate history. Your certificates appear to be of a class that did not carry forward into the current Cedar Ridge equity structure. It happens. Companies change. These things look pretty, but they're mementos, not money." I looked at the certificate on my table. The birch leaf looked back. "Is that your legal position?" I asked. He chuckled. "Let's not make this into that. We can offer you a goodwill payment. You took the time to reach out, and we like to keep our community happy. $50,000 is our standard goodwill for legacy certificate holders, where there is no legal entitlement, but there is, sentiment." I blinked at the window. The sky was so clear I could see where the lake ended, and the sky began without squinting. $50,000, I repeated. "That's generous of you, given that there's nothing at stake." "It's a recognition," he said smoothly, "and when smooth meets steel, you know what you have." "Thank you for the offer," I said. "We'll be in touch." We. Remember that pronoun. He did. I set the receiver down like it might explode. My chest hurt. I wrote his name on a yellow sticky and underlined it. "We'll be in touch" means I'm not done. Mason came over that night with an energy drink and homework, and that look he gets when he thinks he's on the edge of something extraordinary. "Don't take their money," he said before his shoes were off. He'd paused in the alley to read the message I'd texted. 50,000 means millions. I told him I wasn't taking anything and that we were going to do this step by step. We made an appointment with a lawyer. Now this was my mistake. I trusted a name I recognized because he'd had billboards up for 20 years. The kind of smile that made you feel like he could get you out of a parking ticket and into heaven. His receptionist called me dear, and there were magazines from 2 Christmases ago on the table. His office smelled like coffee and cologne and something stale you couldn't name. He looked at the certificates through his readers and said, "Oh, honey, and if you want to watch how I change from sweet to sharp, call me honey when you've got your thumb on my scale." "These are lovely," he said, patting my hand, "but the conversion rights probably expired. Now, good news is there's a company my office works with, Heritage Recovery Group. They can take this off your hands, deal with any paperwork that needs dealing with, and you get half of their fee back from me as a client loyalty rebate." "Win-win," I said. "That's a referral fee." And he smiled like it was Christmas and I was a child who had said eggnog. "We call it a rebate," he said. "Cleaner for taxes." I stood up. "Thank you for your time," I said politely and shook his hand. He squeezed too long. "We'll be in touch." When I got home, there was a car I didn't recognize in my driveway. It was a slate-colored German something, and out of it unfolded a man I recognized from Facebook, my daughter Dana's boyfriend, who I'd met once at a fundraiser with tiny quiches and a silent auction for a wellness retreat. His name was Grant Pemberton, and he was the kind of man who had opinions about partial socks. He had a practiced stubble and the flat palms of a man who doesn't carry his own groceries. "June," he said warmly, too warmly for a driveway. "Dana told me about the situation. I have some experience with corporate structures." He gestured at the house with his chin. "May I?" "I'm hospitable when I choose to be. I chose not to be." "We can talk on the porch," I said, which was where my neighbor could hear if I shouted her name, and she would, because she's a retired nurse and likes being useful. He laughed like I'd told a joke. "You're funny," he said, which is something men say when they wish you weren't. He put his hands in his coat pockets and jingled something. "Dana worries," he said, meaning, "Dana wants me to fix you." "There's a lot of bad faith out there. I thought we could avoid that." "Oh," I said. "How generous." He didn't hear the ice. "I have a contact at Cedar Ridge," he said. "Golf buddies. I can get you a better goodwill offer. Might even be able to push it to 100. I felt my face change. $100,000 for something worth nothing? I asked, too mildly. It's PR, he said. They don't want angry old ladies. He stopped. I'm sorry. You're forgiven for the words, I said, not for the thought. He rocked on his heels. Dana wants you comfortable, he said. I can't stand the idea of you dealing with vultures. I looked at the car, then at him. I know what vultures look like, I said. They don't show their teeth. We didn't hug. He pretended to be called back to his car by a vibration. We'll circle back, he said. We'll put a pin in it. He made the little pinching motion in the air and walked away like he had helped. That night, at dinner, Dana stirred her chili too long and didn't look at me. Grant's trying to be helpful, she said finally. I don't want his help, I said. She set her spoon down hard enough that chili slopped. Mum, she said, the word you use when you are a daughter and a mother at the same time. Don't be stubborn. I'm being secure, I said. There's a difference. We didn't talk about it again that night, because every family has a list of things it can't get through after 10 p.m. without saying something it'll regret. Instead, Mason and I printed out everything we could find on Lakeview microdata. There were 2 local newspaper clippings with pictures of men in wide ties cutting a ribbon. There was a photo of a Christmas party with paper hats. There was a 1-line mention in a business journal of a lawsuit about conversion rights, sealed in settlement. And there was a name, a woman who had been Lakeview's corporate secretary in 1987. Her name was stamped at the bottom of every one of our certificates in neat cursive. Elena M. Armitage. Remember that name. The next morning, I made a call I should have made earlier. When you grow up where I grew up, you don't waste the state. We pay our taxes. We expect the machine to grind when we need it. I called the Minnesota Department of Commerce, Securities Division. I expected to get tossed into a voicemail system. Instead, an assistant put me through to an investigator named Marisol de Leon, who spoke in sentences that were both kind and complete. I told her my story. I told her about Landon Pike. I told her about Rhonda's rebate. I told her about the birch leaf. I told her about Graham's 50,000. When I finished, there was only the hum of the line. Mrs. Avery, she said at last, I'm going to ask you to send me copies of every document you have, not pictures, scans. Do not mail originals. Do not sign anything. If anyone comes to your house, do not let them in, and if they refuse to leave, you call 911 and tell them you are an older adult under a potential financial exploitation scheme. Then you call me, and if Mr. Graham from Cedar Ridge calls again, you ask him to put everything in writing on letterhead. Am I in trouble? I asked, because I am old enough to ask that. She laughed, genuine. You're not in trouble, she said. You have something someone wants. I can't promise you an outcome, but I can promise you this. If there's any law that protects you, we're going to stand on it. I would have hugged her if she'd been there, which she would have accepted because she sounded like someone who knows you have to let a woman be grateful when she wants to be. Thank you, I said. I used to tell kids the truth is a community project. I guess I still believe that. She came up from St. Paul 2 days later with a leather tote and a printer ink smell and a handshake firm enough to reset your spine. She was mid-40s, hair pulled back, eyes that missed none of the dust in my house, and ran a finger along my windowsill like she might be measuring for drapes. You're a librarian, she observed. Me too, in my next life. At my kitchen table, she spread out a neat line of paper and made me walk her through the timeline. When she turned the certificate over, she ran her thumb over the paper like I had. When she held it to the light, she saw the birch leaf and smiled. Someone thought about beauty, she said. They always do when they're selling a dream. She took notes in a small black book, not on a laptop, and that made me love her. The registrar's office at Heron and Davenport has you penciled in, she said. I made a call. We're going to verify whether the certificate numbers were ever cancelled in the master ledger. If they weren't, and if the Lakeview conversion rights were preserved by the 1994 merger, then we're in business. Cedar Ridge will tell you no until they have to tell you yes. They may try to cash you out as an odd lot holder through a reverse split. They may try to force a class vote without notice. They may try to open a guardianship petition. She looked at me then, careful. Has anyone said anything to you about memory? Capacity? I laughed, because sometimes it's laugh or howl. Not yet, I said. They will, she said. It's a move. She slid a card across the table. The moment anyone says the word guardian, you call me. Then you call a different lawyer. What about a lawyer now? I asked. She smiled. I'm not your lawyer. I'm the state. If you want private counsel, I have a list with eyes I trust, not the ones with billboards. She gave me names. I called one. A woman named Zoe Tulchief, who spoke like a professor and swore like a dock worker when the situation required, but mostly kept it to hell, as if God was listening. She met me at a coffee shop because her office was being painted and drank tea without sugar. Got the case file from Mary Sol, she said, tapping her tablet. Here's what we're up against. When Cedar Ridge bought North Shore, there was a reincorporation in Delaware. Delaware makes it easy to clean up messes. However, Minnesota merger law at the time of Lakeview's acquisition requires that certain shareholder rights, if not properly noticed, are preserved. If those certificates, your certificates, were never cancelled in the registrar's master ledger, then you remain a holder. Your Series B is convertible to what is now Class D, which split 5 times, which means... She did the math on a napkin, old school. You could be looking at roughly 3.27 million shares. I breathed in through my nose because sometimes your body has to do something while your life changes. At what price? I asked, as if the question were about apples. Yesterday's close was $38.12, she said. Market won't stay there, of course, but it gives you a number to keep you from getting pushed into goodwill, which is how people spell guilt money when their printer's on. I did the math with her. About 124 million. Before taxes, she added, because the universe does. She leaned in. Now. Cedar Ridge will not want to set the precedent. They will want to pay you under the rug. We're going to make sure there is no rug big enough. You're going to be patient. You're going to be precise. And you're going to let me pick the battlefield. What's the battlefield? I asked, my heart pounding like it used to when Charlie's hand curved around the small of my back in a slow dance. Their annual shareholders meeting, she said, where they'll try to push through a consolidation and a cash-out, where they need a quorum, where the cameras are, where the Attorney General's office can sit in the 3rd row and ask a question at the microphone. We're going to wait? I asked, surprised by the patience in this woman. Months? We're going to prepare, she said. And, if we're lucky, we're going to get our hands on the original Lakeview ledger or a certified copy, the one that shows your certificate numbers never cancelled. That's the birch leaf, Mrs. Avery. That's the leaf we nail to their door. I slept that night, with the certificates in a fireproof bag under my bed. My father's shotgun, unloaded, but sentiment has weight, leaning where a broom normally would. I dreamed of scroll work and Charlie's hands at the kitchen table, counting change from a jar and teaching me to stack quarters so they don't tip. The next weeks were a lesson in being underestimated, That is a gift your enemies give you. Use it. First humiliation. My own daughter. She came to me with wet eyes and a pamphlet Grant had found on elder financial safety, which would be very dear if it didn't feel like a knife accidentally used as a spoon. This is for your protection, she said, in case you're being targeted. I am being targeted, I said, by a man with a car that costs 3 times my house who calls me June, like he's known my pool. She frowned. Don't be mean. I don't have a pool, I said, to make her smile. She didn't. Second humiliation. The bank. Rhonda had me in again to check in, which meant to try again to hand me to Heritage Recovery. She had a new pamphlet with a picture of a happy older couple walking on a beach that looked like it never knew a real winter. We just want to help, she said, and I looked at her hands and wondered if she believed it, because that matters when you judge. Third, Cedar Ridge. They sent me a letter on heavy cream paper, confirming our conversation and offering goodwill at $75,000, which they called generous given the non-viability of the certificates. It came via messenger, as if the weight of the envelope would press me into compliance. Mason took a picture, and we filed it under "We'll laugh later." Fourth, an invitation from Grant to a luncheon at the North Shore Yacht Club. He said it was just a social thing, and then, in the second sentence, he said, "I've invited a friend of mine from the Cedar Ridge board." He said it like he'd done me a kindness. I went. Sometimes you have to sit in the room so you know where the corners are. They put me at a table by the floor-to-ceiling windows. The lake looked like a plane could land on it. The friend was a woman named Sabrina, last name unnecessary when you're queen of a small court. She had a silk blouse that whispered when she moved, and a scarf tied in a knot I didn't know the name for. Her eyes took me in the way you inventory furniture. "June?" she said, like June was a flavour she was tasting. "We've heard so much about you." She did not say from whom, but the glance at Grant made it clear. He smiled at me with the bright silence of someone who has already told your story to himself. I ordered the walleye, because if you're going to be insulted, you might as well do it with the state fish. Sabrina made conversation about legacy equity issues and complexities and whale shares. She used the phrase nuisance claimant, and then had the grace to look chastened, but only just. She asked me if I had grandchildren. I told her I had one. She looked at Mason, who had insisted on coming, because if he was old enough to do calculus, he was old enough to watch a wolf collect its debt. At the end of the lunch, Sabrina reached into her Hermes bag. Don't ask me how I know. Librarians know brands like we know bookbindings, and pulled out a 2-page document. "This is a non-disclosure agreement," she said, like it wasn't a broom. "So we can be frank with you about the company's position and maybe come to a resolution without lawyers. Cover your ears," she added to Mason, a joke that made the men laugh. I read it. It was a no-talk promise, a gag. It prohibited me from speaking to regulators, media, or any third party, which would include the woman from the state. It had a liquidated damages clause that would put me in a hole so deep I could plant trees. "I don't sign gags," I said, and set it down. "You're feisty," Sabrina said, which is like hysterical with lipstick. "Feisty is when small becomes trouble," I said. "I'm not small, and I'm trouble only when someone makes me be. You've done that today." She put her fork down. "Mrs. Avery?" she said, too sleek to be a threat. "I could make a call and have your bank advised to freeze any attempts to transfer improper certificates." "You could try," I said. "And then you would be the one with the problem, not me. Because I know someone at the state who likes to put things in writing more than you like to keep them out. I reached for my water glass and drank until the silence gave way. Fifth humiliation. I wasn't invited to an event I usually made the Jell-O salad for. The church fundraiser committee met without me because Sabrina's friend was on the board, and it felt political. The word floated at me through an email that started "Dear Friends" and ended with "We hope you'll understand." I did. It told me exactly where people thought the winds were blowing. Sixth, Mason came home quiet from practice. Coach said something. He mumbled, looking at the floor. About my grandma trying to hit it big. About how maybe I should expect to lose my spot if we needed sponsorship. He made air quotes with a hand that had dirt under the nails. I stood very still because if I moved, I was going to knock over the table. "Your coach's last name is?" I asked, tone polite enough to scare a man with sense. "Larson," he said. I baked a pie for Coach Larson because that's how we fight up here. I put a note under the crust that said, "Leave my grandson out of your ambition." I do not know if he found it or ate it, but he did not mention sponsorship again. Seventh and final straw. A letter. Dana brought it to me with shaking hands. It was printed on law firm letterhead out of a Minneapolis firm with a clean logo. It was a petition for appointment of a guardian ad litem for purposes of managing the financial claims of Miss June Avery, an older adult, in light of concerns regarding capacity and undue influence. "He did this," she said, eyes brimming, meaning Grant. "He said it was for your protection." I sat down because my legs did not agree with my heart. "For my protection," I repeated. What a tender bully. She dropped into the chair across from me and put her head in her hands. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear to you I didn't. He said there were documents that can be predatory. He said it was just an application. I found out when this came in the mail." I took her hand across the table because she is mine. "We fix it," I said. "Right now." I called Marisol. "They did it," I said. She did not make me explain. "We file a response," she said, "and then we file a complaint." She breathed in. "I told you they'd use that word. They always do when they're losing the other ones." I called Zoe. She had an emergency hearing set for Friday. She was good in a way that made me want to buy her pie every week. She stood in front of a judge who had a tidy beard and said quietly, "Your Honor, this is a preemptive strike by a company with its hand on the scale to silence a witness, not to protect an older adult. My client is doing crosswords in pen." The judge, God bless him, they are not known for speed, looked at me over his glasses. "Mrs. Avery," he said, "do you know where you are right now?" "Room 4B, I said. "What day is it?" he asked. "Friday," I said. "I would like to be at the Friday fish fry, if you please." He tried not to smile, and failed. "Petition denied," he said, gavel dropping, such a small sound for decency. "If anyone approaches you, claiming to have court authority, you call the police. Counsel, I expect not to see anything like this from your firm again." When we left the courthouse, a woman who had sat in the back approached me shyly. Her coat was thin. "Mrs. Avery?" she asked. "I'm Kendra with the Duluth Tribune. Do you mind if I call you sometime? Not now. Just sometime." "I don't mind," I said. Her eyes were kind. "Remember, Kendra, after that, the plan was no longer mine alone. It belonged to a small army of women who had better things to do, but chose mine. Zoe and Marisol worked like a duet. Tanya at Heron and Davenport put in requests to dig old ledgers from microfilm. We found out that the Lakeview master ledger was stored off-site in a warehouse in St. Paul that floods if you stack boxes on the wrong shelves. I knew where it was because that's the kind of detail I collect. Remember this. A box labelled LM87B Ledger 2 was the one Tanya wanted like Christmas morning. A week later, the call came. I was in my garden, pulling up tomatoes that had given up. "We found it," Tanya said, voice shaky for the first time. "Mrs. Avery, we found the ledger. I have your certificates listed, not cancelled. We verified against the QSIP change. Your Series B carried forward. I'm going to send you a certified letter with copies, and I'm going to send them to the Minnesota AG's office and Ms. Tulchief. We're going to get an affidavit from the registrar." She paused, her professionalism cracking. "This doesn't happen," she said. "This is the 1 in 1,000. I've been in this 15 years. I've never gotten to make this call." I sat down in the dirt and cried, clean tears, the good ones. The next call was from Graham at Cedar Ridge. "Mrs. Avery," he said, no smile in his voice now. "We have no legal obligation to recognize any certificates outside the conversion window. There is no ledger you can produce. That will—" "Graham?" I cut in gently. "The ledger belongs to your company's transfer agent. It's your ledger. We're all looking at it. It has my certificate numbers on it. With a row for each, no cancels. With the registrar's initials. With, and this is my favourite part, an embossed seal with a birch leaf." I let that sit. "You told me these were mementos." Silence. "Your lawyers will be in touch," he said finally, clipped as scissors. He hung up. I called Kendra. "Tell me how you tell a story," I said. "Because if we don't control the narrative, Sabrina will, and she's got nicer scarves." She came over with a notebook and a camera, and that sense that good reporters have, like they can feel the gravity of a room. I made coffee and didn't apologize for the chipped mugs. "I want to place this," she said. "Not just because it's the wildest thing I've heard in a year, but because it's not just your story. If they tried to cash you out, they're trying to cash out others. People who didn't have a grandson who Googled. People who didn't have the force of you." "We'll tell it," I said. "But only after the meeting." "Why after?" she asked. And I liked that she asked. "Because," I said, "for once, we will be the ones who say the time, not them." I pointed to the certificates. "They've set the boardroom for a party. We're crashing it." The months between then and the meeting were a lesson in patience. Cedar Ridge tried 3 more times to get me to sign an NDA. A man from the company waited in a rental car outside my house and pretended he was there for work. The church fundraiser committee sent me a "You don't mind sitting this one out, do you?" note with a gift card to a place I would never eat at if it meant I had to pretend gratitude. Dana and I did not talk about Grant, because sometimes love is a stubborn handful. Mason worked on his senior project, Legacy Equity and the Public Trust, and asked me questions like I was an expert, which made me become one because that's what children do. They make you bigger than you think you can be. Marisol built a file. She had tabbed sections on attempts to induce incompetence and improper goodwill offers and registrar integrity. Zoe drafted a proxy statement that would let me vote at the meeting once the transfer agent updated the list. We watched the Cedar Ridge stock price more than was healthy, and I would put my phone in the bread box so the numbers didn't own me. We called the AG's office. We called the Department of Commerce. We called Heron and Davenport. We called the registrar's lawyer, who asked us to please stop calling. We did not. In late March, 5 days before the shareholders' meeting, I got a letter by overnight envelope. Expensive paper again. It was from Cedar Ridge's general counsel. It was an official notice of an extraordinary proposal to be voted at the meeting. Proposal 3. Reverse stock split at a ratio to be determined by the board, with cash out of fractional shares between 0 and 1. The summary said it was for capital structure optimization. The footnote said it would allow the company to round down holders who didn't hold at least one share after the split. The math in that footnote said they could cash out anyone under a certain threshold. Zoe underlined that footnote so hard, she broke a pen. They want to get rid of you before you become a blip on their radar, she said. They are panicked. We will be in that room. She smiled, the kind of smile you bring to a knife fight with a dish towel. And we're going to bring our own dish towels. Marysol's coming, I said. She'll be in the back, Zoe said, because the state doesn't grandstand. But when we need her, she will stand. Mason wore his suit to school the day of the meeting, like it was a dress rehearsal. He gave a presentation in econ that I wish I could have seen. He came home and took out our iron and made his tie line as sharp as a promise. Dana came too, holding my elbow not because I needed it, but because she did. Grant texted her at 10 a.m. I can get you in the VIP room, it said. She didn't write back. At noon. You're making a mistake. At 1. June can still sign. At 2. Don't make me choose. She turned her phone off. The Hyatt Lakeview Ballroom was exactly what you think. Round tables, white linens, 2 projection screens on either side of a stage with a podium, a table for registration, glass urns of water with lemon slices, like they were a personality trait. There was a table with black name badges for directors and officers. There was a table with the microphone for shareholder questions. We checked in. The clerk's eyebrows went up almost to her hairline when she read my name. Welcome, Mrs. Avery, she said, and that might sound like kindness, but it was relief, because she had been told to expect me and had been practicing what her face would do. We sat on the aisle halfway back, an ordinary place to be extraordinary from. In front of us, men in blazers and women in suits chatted like it was any afternoon in America where people talk about other people's money. The meeting opened with the board chair, a woman with hair so smooth it looked lacquered, calling to order. The CEO smiled. He had a jawline carved by central casting and a name I won't say because he's had enough. The CFO stood to do the safe harbor, forward-looking statements, which is legal for don't sue us for dreaming. They rattled through the first proposals, approve the auditor, elect the slate, ratify a plan free of legacy burdens. When Proposal 3 came, there was a hum in the room, the way a hive sounds when someone shakes it a little. The board chair smiled like she knew how to do this with her eyes closed. As you know, she said, this management is committed to making Cedar Ridge leaner, smarter, and more competitive. Part of that is managing our shareholder role. We have an unusual number of small, inactive legacy holders who cost us money. We propose a reverse split with cash out of fractional holders under 1. This is standard. It's cleaner. It's better for all of us in the long term. Zoe tapped my arm. You ready? She whispered. Born ready, I whispered back, which would have made my mother roll her eyes from heaven. The chair said, Any questions? In a tone that was mostly I dare you, and I stood. My knees clicked. I took the aisle and the microphone like I had paid the rent on it. The investor relations officer started to step forward to manage me into a whisper, but I looked at him like he was a boy in my library trying to cut pages out of an encyclopedia. Mrs. Avery, the chair said, smiling with her teeth. Welcome. Thank you, I said, for the welcome and the lemon water. I looked at the crowd. I could feel them cool around me, curious. My name is June Avery. I am a registered holder of 3,263,840 shares of Cedar Ridge Telecom Holding through conversion of Lakeview Microdata Series B Preferred, which your own registrar has certified as uncancelled and carried forward through the 1994 merger. I paused, because sometimes you let the number settle before you ask the baker to cut the cake. The smile cracked. "I'm sorry," the chair said. "That's not—" I held up my hand. "No, you're not," I said gently. "But you will be." I turned and looked at a door at the back of the room. It opened, like a stage cue, because it was. A man in a charcoal suit stepped in with a blue accordion file. His head was shaved, his glasses were thin, and his eyes were the kind that looked like they could tell you if your account balance was off by 1 to 12. It was the registrar's attorney from Heron and Davenport. He nodded at me, the smallest nod, and walked to the front. A woman in a navy blazer with a state seal pin on her lapel came in behind him. Mary Sol. She took a chair in the third row. That's when I said it. I took the mic, and in a room designed to make you small, I said 3 words. Check the ledger. It was theatre and law. It was the truth wrapped in a show. The registrar's attorney set the accordion case on the table at the front and opened it with the solemnity people use for sacraments. He handed up a certified copy of the Lakeview ledger pages with my certificate numbers and a notarized affidavit beneath that. The notary's seal was fresh. The birch leaf was right there, embossed, like a ghost of a forest. The CFO's face went the colour of paper. The CEO recovered quickly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice trained to smooth even a car crash, "we will take a brief recess." "We won't," the chair said, and that was when I realized the story I'd told myself about her was missing a chapter. She took the pages, scanned, and then did what women who have been told too many times to smile do when the time for smiling is dead. She lifted her head and spoke into the microphone. "Before we proceed," she said, "we have a late correction to the proxy. The presence of a new holder of record in excess of 5% requires additional notice under our bylaws. General Counsel?" The General Counsel, an exhausted man in a suit that didn't fit quite right because he hadn't expected to need a new one until next quarter, stood up, shuffled papers, and said, Under our bylaws, we may proceed." Mary Sol stood. She didn't need the mic. She held up her badge like it was an answer to a question nobody had asked. "Under Minnesota's blue sky laws, as they applied at the time of Lakeview's merger," she said, "conversion rights preserved by failure of notice remain. Any attempt to cash out a holder of record under a reverse split without proper class voting could be a violation. We recommend postponement of any vote touching common or preferred rights until we have concluded our review." She smiled, like a door closing on a draft. "We are not asking. We are advising." Sabrina stood from the front row, where she had parked herself like a queen at a tournament. "This is outrageous," she hissed. It's law," Zoe said, rising from the middle of the room like a tide. "And it's math. If you've got a quarrel with either, take it up with the times tables." The registrar's attorney handed the microphone to the chair. "We will respect the process," the chair said, looking pointedly at the CEO, who looked like a man who had just found out the ocean moves. "We will recess to consult counsel." They recessed. Security flurried in quiet, the way geese do, noise without content. Investors stood up and whispered in little knots. There's a sound for schadenfreude in rooms like this. It's a chuckle people swallow in their coffee. Kendra had slipped in during the show. She sat behind me and squeezed my shoulder. "Holy hell," she whispered. "This is a movie." She lifted her phone. "Tell me when I can take a picture." You can take one of my grandson, I said, nodding to Mason, who was standing like a tree, tall, rooted, and exactly where you wanted him. Grant appeared at the side of the room and looked at Dana with a face that said, I am not in control, and I will make that your fault. He lifted his hands in a helpless gesture that would have worked on me at 20. It didn't work on him at 47. Dana turned away. The board filed back in. The chair looked at me and then at the room. We are postponing the vote on Proposal 3, she said. We will convene a special meeting within the time required by law with appropriate notice. We will also be announcing the formation of a special committee to review legacy equity issues. It was a surrender, as far as they could make one on a stage built for control. It was also a barricade. They thought they could wait me out. But that wasn't the end. Before we adjourn, Marisol said, the Attorney General's office would like to note the filing of an injunction preventing any transfer, cancellation, or cash out of the holder of records shares pending our review. And a separate matter. Mr. Graham Lyle? She turned. Agents are in the lobby. There is an ongoing investigation into misleading statements to legacy holders. You are requested to accompany them. It was not a random surprise. It was the result of recorded calls and letters written on letterhead that said one thing when the law said another. It was a slow, careful gathering of a net. Graham's eyes went flat like fish. He walked out with two plainclothes who looked like the fathers of teenagers and had no patience for nonsense. There weren't handcuffs. This was Minnesota. But the room rippled with the theatre of a reckoning. The CEO swallowed. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we're adjourned. I stood there, holding the microphone, and felt the years of being small slip off my shoulders like a coat I could finally hang up. The applause started as a smattering, polite, curious, and then found a rhythm. It wasn't thunder. I don't want to pretend. But it was real. People stood. A few at first, and then more. Mason's eyes shone. That was the moment Dana let out a breath like she'd been underwater. She took my face in her hands and kissed my forehead. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry I doubted. I'm sorry I brought him into this. I'm sorry I forgot who you were. I laughed. I never forgot, I said. I was just busy being it. The fallout was not immediate drama. It was 1,000 steady hammers. Cedar Ridge announced that the special committee would include 2 independent directors who were lawyers with more to lose than they had to gain. The Duluth Tribune ran Kendra's story the next day. Grandmother's worthless stock could be worth millions. State steps in. The wire services picked it up because there is no way to hide a story that makes America feel like its daughter turned the table. I got calls from women in outstate towns whose fathers had boxes in closets. We formed a little club of people who had been told, Grandma wallpaper. The Attorney General's office opened a hotline for legacy equity holders targeted by predatory finders. Heritage Recovery sent me a cease and desist for calling them predatory, which we put in a frame because sometimes you mount your trophies. Rhonda at the bank brought me a casserole because she was a decent person in a system that nudges your elbow. She apologized for pushing heritage. They train us to keep things efficient, she said. Sometimes efficient can't be right. I hugged her because she was brave enough to say it. A week later, a certified packet arrived. The registrar had updated the roll. I was the holder of record, 3,263,140 shares. It felt like touching a thunderhead. Zoe helped me submit a Schedule 13D, the filing you make when you hold more than 5%. She helped me craft a letter to the board. We asked for a meeting. They ignored us. We published the letter. The market smelled drama and moved like it does. The stock went up and down like a carnival ride. I watched it only in the mornings and at night. During the day, I made soup. Then came something I didn't expect. A woman in a cardigan that had given up its buttons came to my door with a tin of cookies. She was in her 80s. "I'm Elena Armitage," she said, and I thought my knees might give. "My grandson showed me the paper. That's my name on your certificates." We sat at my table with coffee and cookies and the weight of 2 lives in a stack of pages. "I thought we were the only ones," she said. "They sent letters nobody understood. They told us to send things for safekeeping. People did." Tears pooled in her eyes. "We did what we were told." "You did what you were taught to trust," I said, holding her hand, feeling the paper-thin skin that reminded me of old books and of how valuable they are. "We're going to fix as much of this as we can." Elena had boxes. She had minutes of Lakeview board meetings. She had a diary that said, in tidy handwriting, "Told Mr. Hall to include conversion rights notice in spring mailers. He said not necessary because of merger. Worry about this." Remember this. Her worry. It was a flame kept under a pot, warming something years later. We took Elena to meet Marisol. We made copies. We ate too many cookies. We laughed like we were plotting a heist because we were, stealing back what had been stolen. 2 months later, the special meeting was convened. It was smaller, angrier, and in a room with lower ceilings. They thought it would be easier to control the sound. It wasn't. We went through the motions again. The chair called the meeting to order. The CEO tried for charming. The CFO was not there. He had resigned for family reasons. They put forward a revised Proposal 3 with language that made my teeth grind. They wanted to cash out holders under a threshold that conveniently would have included legacy holders who had recently been recognized. They claimed it was for the good of all. I stood again. "I have a proposal," I said. "Let's not do this." The chair smiled tightly. "Mrs. Avery?" she said. "You can't propose from the floor." "Then let me ask a question," I said, "which is how women have been making proposals since the beginning of time. Why are you so afraid of a few old shareholders? Why not let us be?" I gestured at the room. "There's enough money for you. There's enough for me. Let's not make this an ethics lesson you flunk in public." A man stood in the back. He was thin, nervous, with a tie he hadn't tied often. "I lost my father's certificates," he said. "They told me they were gone. They aren't gone, are they? They're here somewhere." His voice cracked. "I'm not asking for a miracle. I'm asking for my paper." A murmur moved through the room. A murmur can be deadly. Boards can endure anger. They are terrified of shame. Zoe stood beside me. "Our proposal is simple," she said. "A fair process for legacy holders. A task force to locate and verify and honour legitimate claims with an independent monitor. No reverse split that disadvantages them without a class vote. You can either embrace it and be the heroes, or fight it and be the villains in a story that is writing itself, whether you approve or not." The chair looked at the CEO. He did not meet her eyes. He was busy looking at the floor. They took a break. They came back with a plan that was a version of ours with different adjectives. We accepted because winning is sometimes getting what you want with their name on it. The shareholders voted. The press took pictures. Kendra scribbled and grinned. The man with the badly tied tie cried. Did we get every scrap back? No. Life is not a cleaning show. It's a farm. You plant, you harvest, you lose some to the birds. But we got enough. So here is the part people ask me most. The number. After the dust, after the paperwork, after the accountants did whatever they do that makes my head itch, I was the holder of 3,263,840 shares of Cedar Ridge Telecom. At the price on the day we filed, that was 497,420. I don't think I'll ever write that number without thinking of mac and cheese boxes. Taxes. Yes. I paid them like a blessing. I paid a man who looked like he shouldn't be allowed to tie a tie to do some clever footnotes. I set up a trust because Zoe told me to, and because I wanted this to be my gift, not my grandchildren's burden. It's called the Attic Birch Foundation, because I'm sentimental when it serves the cause. I took care of my house, a new roof, windows that keep winter where it belongs. I bought the good coffee. I did not buy a German car. I gave to the library, to the school, to the hospital where my daughter has held more hands than anyone I know. I started a program for kids who want to learn to solder because there are still hands that want to make things. I bought 10 hot plates for home EC. I paid for a new scoreboard for the high school, even though Coach Larson didn't deserve the electricity it used. I put aside tuition for Mason, but not enough to spoil him, enough to free him. The rest sits in an account where it does more good than harm because money is a tool, not a costume. Grant? Grant did not fare well. When the petition for guardianship hits the light, the kind men like him melt. He moved to an apartment in a building with a doorman who had his number. He sent Dana flowers. He sent me a note that said, "No hard feelings?" I wrote back, "All the hard ones." He tried to get a job at a firm that wanted to lean in on opportunity, and he ended up in a cubicle that made him learn how to use a stapler without an assistant. Last I heard, he was being deposed in a different matter that required him to explain why he promised what he couldn't deliver. He cannot spell apology without a proofreader. Dana, my daughter, the one who cried into her chili because she thought she might be failing me, left him. She said, "I love you, but not more than I love me." And I think that is the lesson all of us should learn by 35. She is dating a paramedic who brings donuts and asks after my arthritis like he means it. He shovels my walkway and doesn't make me feel like I owe him anything. Mason. My boy made Dean's List his first semester at the University of Minnesota. He is studying finance, because of course he is, but he volunteers at the legal clinic on Thursdays to help older people with paperwork. He says, "Older people," and then looks at me to see if I'm offended. I'm not. I will always be older than someone. He calls me every Sunday. He tells me the price of Cedar Ridge not because I need to know, but because he likes the romance of numbers now. He is careful with what he loves. Elena? We named the computer lab after her. We put the birch leaf on the sign. She cried the day we unveiled it, a trembling that moved from her hands to mine and back again, like current. She died 2 months later. I told her before she went that her initials are on my certificates, which means her name is on everything I do. She said, "Then you owe me good cookies," and I do. Rhonda at the bank brought me a basket of fancy jam with a note that said, "For filling our pantry with words." Kendra wrote a follow-up story, A Ledger of Mercy. It won a state award. She used the word vindication, which is not my favorite flavor, but it tasted right that day. She included this sentence, "Sometimes the ledger isn't just numbers, it's names." Cedar Ridge. They survived. They made money because the internet doesn't care about your governance as much as your bandwidth. The board replaced the CEO with the chair, who turned out to be good at her job when her mouth wasn't asked to do all the work. They created a whole department for legacy equity. A man named David runs it, who sends Christmas cards to the people we helped. They still try to do things in the easiest way. We still make sure ease doesn't erase. And me? I still live in my skinny green house. I still have the clothes line. I still attend the Friday fish fry. I still make mac and cheese when people are sad, because grief needs carbs. I sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that costs too much, and I do what I've always done. I keep the library of my life in order. I have more, not less, of what matters. Not money. Money is a tide. It comes in, it goes out. It leaves rings on the pier. I mean peace. There was one more thing. Something nobody asked me about because it wasn't their business. In the tin, under the certificates, there was an old cassette tape. Remember I told you about things you find under paper? It was labelled in Charlie's neat hand. In case. I found an old tape player. I put it in like I was handling a baby bird. The tape whirred. His voice filled the kitchen, older than when he died, because voices age in memory, not on tape. June, he said. If you find this, you went to the attic, which means we're either desperate or sentimental. Both are holy. He laughed. You probably have it handled. But just in case, trust the math. Trust the people who show up without being paid. And if someone calls you honey while he's asking you to sign something, set it down and bake a pie. Never underestimate the power of a pie to slow down a bad plan. I baked a pie that night, a raspberry that stained my fingers and the cutting board. I took a slice to Elena. I took a slice to Rhonda. I took one to the young lawyer at Zoe's office who had stayed up late drafting what she called the sledgehammer. I took one to Coach Larson because mercy tastes better than victory. I took one to the church fundraiser committee and left it on the table without a note. I took one to the man in the suit who had waited in a car outside my house and watched me like he was owed. He didn't answer when I knocked, so I put it on his hood. He came out and looked at me with a face that wasn't sure how to fold itself into either gratitude or shame. It's a pie, I said, not a contract. He lifted the tin. Thank you, he said. Don't be what you are on a form, I said to him. Be better. I ate the last piece myself at my table with my tape player still warm. I licked the fork clean and thought about ledgers. Sometimes the numbers add up to what you're owed. Sometimes they add up to who you are. If this story hit home, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if your family has an attic and what you found that you didn't know you were keeping. Bring me your birch leaf. I'll show you mine. End.